All right, today we're going to talk about how to multiply and divide complex numbers. So a little bit longer, but really we're just distributing. So with multiplication, we're going to distribute, and you're going to pretend and treat I as if it's an X, at least for the moment. So 2 times 4 is going to give me 8. 2 times a negative 5i is going to give me a negative 10i. 3i times 4 is going to give me a positive 12i. And then 3i times a negative 5i, this is going to be a negative 15. Positive times a negative is negative. And then I times I is I squared, just like an x times an x is x squared. Now, just a reminder, I technically is the square root of a negative 1. And so that's where the I comes from. It's taking the square root of a negative. Therefore, I squared is actually equal to negative 1. Let's combine like terms, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. So we have 8, a negative 10i plus a 12i gives me a positive 2i, minus 15i squared. Well, I squared is a negative 1, so I'm going to replace I squared with a negative 1. Now, you actually have in your calculator a button for I. So I forget if it's second with the negative button or second with the decimal, but you'll see the selection after you hit second. You'll see the little I symbol down at the very bottom of your calculator. Now, technically, you could plug in negative 15i squared in your calculator, and it'll tell you it's a positive 15. How does it do that? Because if I squared is negative 1, then therefore this negative 15 times this negative 1, negative times negative is positive. So this becomes a positive 15. So really we have 8 plus 2i plus 15, because that negative times negative gets me positive. Now you see that we have like terms, right? We have this positive 8 and a positive 15. When those combine, we get 23 plus 2i. And so remember, with imaginary numbers, standard form says we're going to put those at the end after our constant, our number by itself. All right, distributive property, not terrible. The only thing you have to remember is that I squared is the same thing as a negative 1. So all that's going to happen is it's going to flip the sign, right? A lot of people, after you do a few examples, you have negative 15, you realize, oh, this I squared is just going to flip the sign, make it a positive 15. So you can kind of skip that middle step. Now, number 2, division. So with division, because I is the square root of a negative 1, you cannot have a square root in the bottom of a fraction, just like you can't divide by a 0. You can't divide by a square root. So we need to get that out of the bottom of our fraction. And how we do that is we multiply what's called a complex conjugate. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. If we have our denominator as 2 plus 3i, then what you need to multiply, top and bottom of this fraction, is by 2 minus 3i over 2 minus 3i. So technically, to get rid of this square root in the bottom of your fraction, you need to multiply the top and bottom of your fraction by its conjugate, complex conjugate. And all that is if this is a 2 plus 3i, you multiply by 2 minus 3i. If this was a 2 minus 3i, then you would multiply by 2 plus 3i. So you just multiply by its opposite. And what's going to happen is they're all going to cancel out, and we're just going to get a number in a denominator, and it'll get rid of the I. The only issue with that is that now we have to distribute twice. So go Tigers. Let's distribute the numerator first, and then we'll distribute the denominator. There is a shortcut to that. I'll point that out in a moment. So 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. So here's my new numerator. 4 times negative 3i is going to give me a negative 12i. Negative 5i times 2 will give me a negative 10i. And then negative 5i times a negative 3i gives me a positive 15i squared. Negative times negative is positive. 5 times 3 is 15. I times I is I squared. So from the last problem, you may be looking at this saying, hold on, all the I squared does is flip the sign, right? So that's going to end up being a negative 15, and you're right. Let's do the denominator next. So 2 times 2 is going to give me 4. You might want to check your calculator, make sure I did my math right. And then 2 times a negative 3i is going to give me a negative 6i. 3i times 2 is a positive 6i. 3i times a negative 3i, positive times negative is negative. 3 times 3 is 9. I times I squared. Okay. Let's combine any like terms, and let's get rid of the I squareds. So we're going to start with the numerator first. I have the 8 in my numerator, so here's 8. I have a negative 12i and a negative 10i. If I combine those together, I get a negative 22i. This positive 15i, so I get plus 15i squared, and I squared is negative 1. Now again, do you have to show that step? No. If you realize, oh, that's just going to be a negative 15, then you can write that right away. What about the denominator? So the denominator, I have a 4. I have no like terms with that 4. The nice thing is that these are going to cancel out. So a negative 6i and a positive 6i, which is why we multiply by its opposite, which is called a complex conjugate. Those are gone. Now I have this minus 9i squared. Well, we know that minus 9 and I squared is a negative 1. So it's just going to flip the sign. So now, technically, in my numerator, this positive 15i, this positive 15 and this negative 1, that's really just a negative 15, right? Class is over. In the bottom, this negative 9 and this negative 1, this is just a positive 9. So the I squared flipped the sign of the positive 15 to make it negative 15. The I squared flipped the sign of the negative 9 to make it positive 9. So now we just have to combine any like terms. Let's start with the top first. So 8 minus that 15 is going to give me a negative 7. So my numerator, when I combine these like terms, is going to be a negative 7. And then I don't have a like term for this minus 22i, so I'm going to say minus 22i. And this is all over a negative 9, negative 1. We already got positive 9. So 4 plus 9 is going to give me a positive 13. Now, I realize that is a little challenging. We will do more practice and get more help, and you can ask any questions in class. But that is just an intro to multiplying and dividing complex numbers.